Today we continue our journey through 2 Samuel chapters 7 to 9. David was now settled in his palace, and the Lord had given him rest from his enemies. David looked around at his own house and realized that the ark of God was still staying in a tent. So David told Nathan, the prophet, that he wanted to build a house for the Lord. At first, Nathan thought it was a good idea. But that night, God gave Nathan a message for David. The Lord had not commanded David to build him a house. From the beginning, God had chosen to dwell among his people in the tabernacle. But then God gave David a promise that was far greater than anything David had planned. The Lord said he would establish a house for David. David wanted to build a house for God. God said he would build a house for David. This promise is known as the Davidic covenant. God promised that David's kingdom and throne would continue. The ultimate fulfillment of this promise is none other than Jesus Christ, the Son of David, whose kingdom will never end. When Nathan told David everything the Lord had promised, David went in and sat before the Lord, and then he prayed. David said, "Who am I, sovereign Lord? And what is my family that you have brought me this far?" David understood that everything he had received came from God. He did not respond with pride. He responded with worship. And David continued. David said, "How great are you, sovereign Lord? There is none like you, and there is no God but you." God had brought David from the pasture to the palace. But David understood that the palace was not the greatest blessing. The greatest blessing was that God had chosen to establish his purposes through him, through David. Chapter 8 records David's military victories. The Lord gave David victory over the Philistines, the Moabites, the Arameans, and the Edomites. David's kingdom continued to expand. But notice what David did with the spoils of war. He dedicated them to the Lord. The victories belonged to God. So David gave the glory and the treasures back to God. David's victories also connected us back to God's covenant promises to Abraham. The territory David ruled over was connected to the land God promised to Abraham. God was continuing to fulfill his covenant promises through Israel's history. Yet the complete fulfillment of God's kingdom promises will ultimately be found in Jesus Christ. Now, chapter 9 then reveals David's heart. David asked, "Is there anyone still left of the house of Saul to whom I can show God's kindness?" David remembered his covenant with Jonathan. He was told about Mephibosheth, Jonathan's son. Mephibosheth was living in Lodabar. David sent for him. When Mephibosheth came before the king, he bowed down and asked, "What is your servant that you should notice a dead dog like me?" But David did not bring him into his presence to punish him. David restored to him all the land that had belonged to Saul. He also commanded that Mephibosheth would always eat at the king's table. Mephibosheth was the son of David's covenant friend. He could not restore him. He could not earn his way into the king's presence. David brought him in because of a covenant. This is a powerful picture of grace. Now, what do these chapters teach and show us today? God often gives us more than we could ever plan for ourselves. God is the one who establishes his promises. God's blessings should lead us to worship, not pride. Victory belongs to the Lord. Covenant faithfulness extends beyond one generation. God shows grace to those who cannot save themselves. Now, let's connect all of this across Scripture. God's promise to David points forward to Jesus Christ, the eternal Son of David. The Davidic covenant connects to God's promises to Abraham in Genesis 12, 15, and chapter 17. Mephibosheth's place at the king's table reminds us of the grace of God that brings the undeserving into his presence. Jesus Christ ultimately fulfills the promise of an everlasting throne and kingdom. Now, I'm encouraging you to read 2 Samuel chapter 7 to 9 in full. Watch David desire to build a house for God. Watch God promise to build a house for David. Watch David respond with worship. And watch covenant kindness bringing and being Mephibosheth from Lo Debar to the king's table. The story continues tomorrow.